Margaret stood outside for a long moment, her worn coat pulled tight against the autumn chill. Through the window, she could see families laughing together, couples holding hands across small wooden tables. She almost turned back. Almost. But her sister Rachel had begged her. "Please, Maggie, just this once. I can't miss this interview. It could change everything for me. He won't even notice. Just sit there for 20 minutes, tell him I had an emergency, and leave." So here Margaret was, 38 years old, standing in for her glamorous younger sister on a blind date with someone named Daniel Foster. A CEO, Rachel had said with stars in her eyes. A single father. Wealthy, exactly the kind of man Rachel had spent years hoping to meet. Margaret pushed open the door. The warmth inside wrapped around her immediately. Fairy lights twinkled from every corner, and lanterns hung like gentle stars above each table. The scent of coffee and cinnamon filled the air. For just a moment, Margaret let herself breathe it in. "Miss Anderson?" A voice, deep but gentle, spoke from her left. Margaret turned and felt her breath catch. Daniel Foster stood beside a corner table, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. He was tall, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and eyes that held something Margaret hadn't expected. Kindness. He wore a navy vest over a crisp white shirt. Professional but not stiff. Approachable. Beside him, clinging to his hand, was a little girl with strawberry blonde curls and the brightest smile Margaret had ever seen. She couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, wearing a pale blue dress with delicate lace details. The child's eyes sparkled with pure joy as she looked up at Margaret. "I'm Daniel," he said, extending his hand. "And this is my daughter, Emma." Margaret's carefully prepared speech dissolved on her tongue. She'd planned to make excuses, to explain that Rachel couldn't come, to leave as quickly as possible, but Emma was already tugging her father's sleeve, pointing excitedly at the table where colored markers lay scattered like fallen confetti. "Daddy, Daddy! Can she color with me, please?" "Emma, sweetheart, let's give our guest a chance to sit down first," Daniel said, but his voice held only affection, no impatience. Margaret found herself being guided to the table. She sat down slowly, her mind spinning. This wasn't what she'd expected. Rachel had made it sound like a typical blind date, awkward small talk, forced chemistry, the usual dance of first impressions. No one had mentioned a child. "I hope you don't mind that I brought Emma," Daniel said, settling into his chair while his daughter climbed onto the seat beside him. "My sitter canceled at the last minute, and I thought this might actually be better. More honest." "I don't mind at all," Margaret heard herself say, and surprisingly, she meant it. Emma had already pushed a piece of paper toward her, along with several markers. "Will you draw with me? I'm making pictures of happy things." Margaret picked up a blue marker, her fingers trembling slightly. "What kind of happy things?" "Everything," Emma declared, her whole face lighting up. "Puppies and rainbows and hot chocolate and—" She paused thoughtfully. "And new friends." Something in Margaret's chest cracked open. Just a little. Daniel ordered coffee for them both and hot chocolate for Emma. As they waited, he didn't ask the usual blind date questions. Instead, he told her about his work, not bragging, just sharing, and how he'd started his company from nothing 15 years ago. How Emma had changed everything when she came into his life 3 years ago, after his wife had passed away. Margaret listened, really listened, the way she'd learned to do during her years working as a nurse. She heard the grief underneath his words, but also the gratitude. "The love, what about you?" Daniel asked gently. "Rachel mentioned you work in healthcare?" Margaret hesitated. This was the moment. She should tell him the truth, that she wasn't Rachel, that this was all a mistake, that she should leave. But Emma was humming softly beside her, coloring a picture of what looked like a flower garden, and the cafe felt so warm, so safe. "I'm a nurse," Margaret said quietly. "I work at Memorial Hospital. Pediatric ward," Daniel's eyes brightened. Emma spent time in a pediatric ward when she was younger. The nurses there, they were angels. Patient, kind, never too busy to comfort a scared little girl. Emma nodded seriously, not looking up from her drawing. "The nurses sang to me. They had magic hands that made the hurt less. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "That's what we try to do," she said softly. "Make the hurt less." The conversation flowed like honey after that, sweet and natural. Daniel asked about her work, and Margaret found herself telling stories she rarely shared, about the children she cared for, the families she supported, the small victories that made the hard days worthwhile. She didn't notice an hour passing, then two. Emma eventually curled up against her father's side, drowsy but content, still clutching her markers. Her little hand reached out and touched Margaret's sleeve. "You have a kind face," Emma murmured sleepily. "Like the nurses who sang to me?" Daniel smiled, brushing his daughter's curls back gently. "She's usually shy with new people," he said to Margaret. "But she's comfortable with you. Children have good instincts about people." Margaret looked down at her hands, rough and practical from years of work. Nurses' hands, hands that had comforted countless children but had never held one of her own. "I should tell you something," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But Daniel spoke at the same time. "I should tell you something, too." They both stopped, laughed a little nervously. "You first," Daniel said. Margaret took a deep breath. The fairy lights seemed to glow brighter around them, like stars offering encouragement. "I'm not who you think I am," she said. "My name isn't Rachel Anderson. I'm Margaret, Maggie. Rachel is my sister. She couldn't make it tonight. She had a job interview, and she asked me to come and explain. But then I got here and saw Emma, and I just—" She trailed off, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I should have told you right away." She expected anger, or at least disappointment. Instead, Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then slowly he smiled. "That's a relief," he said, "because the Rachel I spoke to on the phone didn't sound anything like you. She talked about ambition and success and climbing corporate ladders. All fine things, but—" He paused, looking down at his sleeping daughter. "But not what I'm looking for. Not what Emma needs. What are you looking for?" Margaret asked. Daniel met her eyes, and the honesty there took her breath away. "Someone real," he said simply. "Someone who understands that life isn't always glamorous. Someone who knows how to find joy in small moments, a child's drawing, a warm cafe on a cold night, a genuine conversation." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close. "Someone like you, Maggie." Margaret felt something bloom in her chest, something she'd thought had withered years ago. Hope. "I'm not exciting," she warned him. "I work long shifts. I come home exhausted. I've never been to fancy restaurants or worn designer clothes. I'm just me. Just you sounds perfect," Daniel said softly. Emma stirred, blinking up at them both with sleepy eyes. "Are you coming home with us?" she asked Margaret with childlike directness. "Emma!" Daniel said, laughing. "That's not—" But Margaret was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. "Not tonight, sweetheart. But maybe we could meet again? The three of us?" Emma's face brightened like sunrise. "For hot chocolate?" "For hot chocolate," Margaret agreed. They walked out together into the autumn evening, the cafe glowing warm behind them. Daniel carried Emma, who'd fallen back asleep on his shoulder, her small hand still clutching one of her drawings. At Margaret's car, Margaret looked up, tears in her eyes, to find Daniel watching her with an expression so tender it made her heart ache. "She drew that tonight," he said quietly, while we were talking. "She drew you into her happy things." Margaret clutched the picture to her chest, overwhelmed. Life, she thought, had a strange way of putting you exactly where you needed to be. She'd come to this cafe as an imposter, a substitute, someone filling in for her more exciting younger sister. But maybe, just maybe, she'd found something real, something true, something that was finally, beautifully hers. As she drove home that night, Margaret thought about kindness, how it circulates through the world like light, touching people in unexpected ways. She'd spent years offering kindness to others, to sick children and worried parents, giving without expecting anything in return. Perhaps it was finally her turn to receive some. Her phone chimed at a red light. A text from a number she didn't recognize, but somehow knew. Emma wants you to know that you're officially invited to next Tuesday's tea party. Dress code. Comfortable. Hot chocolate mandatory. Would love to see you again if you're willing. Daniel, Margaret typed back with trembling fingers. I'll be there. And for the first time in a very long time, she couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring.